Okay, no lie. 10th time I'm recording this introduction. So I'm going to get straight to the point. I've got an interesting episode for you here with a gentleman named Quin who is dealing with bipolar. He's navigating his mental illness pretty well. I'm pretty impressed with this young man. Hopefully you enjoy the conversation. Quin has his own podcast that he does. It's a kind of a historical fiction-ish kind of show where he takes on stories, murderers from the Victorian era. And then with those facts in hand, he kind of writes a story about maybe what that person is going through, maybe a little behind the scenes, maybe events leading up to murderers, things like that. It's very interesting. I highly recommend you check it out. I'll put links in the show notes. Like I said, I'm not going to yammer on too much. So thank you, everyone, for downloading the show and listening. I appreciate you all so very much. And it's Thursday, January 23rd, 2020. And as of this recording, I'm still depressed, but I'm not dead. Okay, so I'm here with Quin. Quin and I bumped into each other on Reddit. I had put a post out asking for folks who might want to come on the podcast, discussing mental illness and things like that. And Quin jumped right up. And finally, I've got him on, and I'm looking forward to getting to know him a little bit. So, Quin, say hi.
Hey there. Yeah, so I'm Quin. I'm the host of a horror podcast called Mania, and I live with a form of bipolar.
Okay. And can I ask your age? Is that?
Yeah, you could. So I'm 21 years old.
Okay. And so are you've official diagnosis, or are you kind of self-diagnosed, or how's that going?
It's more self-diagnosed, but I
Okay.
would be shocked to find that I was wrong.
Okay. Yeah, so I was talking with a guy today. It was my first conversation really one-on-one with someone with bipolar, and I learned quite a lot about it, and it was pretty interesting. So I deal with depression, and avoidant personality disorder and some other things, but mostly the depression. So it was kind of eye-opening to me to talk about mania and just the kind of way that he was dealing with it. So I'm curious, how long do you think you've been dealing with bipolar?
Well, I think I've been dealing with it since I was around 16 years old or 17.
Okay.
And when I really started to look into it, why I was having these very violent mood swings, be very depressive for a few days, and then very euphoric for several days afterwards, or some variation of that, even within hours. When I really started to look into it and start to recognize it as something to remedy and work with, rather than just a bizarre part of my personality that I didn't understand, that's when things started getting a lot better, because it felt like there was a clearer path forward.
Okay. So what have you kind of learned along the way as far as coping skills or whatnot? I mean, so let's talk about the mania side first. Like, how do you navigate that when those symptoms are present?
Well, I think that some people with bipolar can agree that there's an upside to it. So I think we'll talk about the upside first, and that some people don't know what it necessarily feels like to be so exuberantly euphoric and happy, almost to a point of being like very distracted, and kind of existing in a way that's not normal to society. But that's a very active energy. You can do a lot with it. You know, it's fantastic for artists or really anyone who's passionate about something to have access to a very just euphoric, heightened state of mind where you're very invested in your life and yourself. Even if it's just for a brief burst of a few hours or days, can be very useful to setting you on a really wholesome, positive course towards whatever your goals are.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I hear that a lot from folks who I've heard talk about bipolar. I've gone to Depression Bipolar Support Alliance. They have DBSA. They have group peer-led meetings. and it's about half depression, half bipolar. Um, and they talk about just these periods of having so much energy and creativity, and that's like the good side of it. But the other side of it is that they kind of get themselves overstretched a little bit, or maybe have make some poor decisions at times of
Mhm.
mania. Is that something you've experienced?
Yes. I have a friend who has, I think, the most extreme form of bipolar, where he would actually have sort of blackout episodes and
Mm,
not really be fully lucid and during his euphoric states. And luckily, I don't have that. I believe I have a form of bipolar that is known as bipolar 2, where
okay.
you have something called hypomania. So it's a more almost like a watered down version of that. So it's not nearly as debilitating. Um, but I do definitely feel the depressive side of it that swings in the opposite direction, and
Okay.
that's kind of the thing to be careful of, I think.
Yeah. So what have you like? How do you manage those days?
I kind
Like,
of
do
look at
you?
it. Oh, sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, do you just kind of ride it out? Do you have
Mm.
like some kind of coping mechanism, or what? How's that go for you?
Well, it definitely varies. There are certain days where it feels like a cold almost. I kind of think of it like a cold, because I think that as we navigate this advancing awareness and with mental illness, we will start to just see it as, the way we see pneumonia or
Mm,
any other disease, something that we just work with when it presents itself. And so in my case, there are days when it feels like just the symptoms of a cold, like a headache or a cough. So it's annoying, but it's definitely not going to ruin my day. And there
okay.
are other days when it's, you feel bedridden and you feel like you mentally, like in a way, feels as if you can't get out of bed.
Hmm.
And
Right.
that may present itself in the literal, form of that. Otherwise, often, like at its worst, I think is just this fogginess, where even if I try to access the tools that I use to get out of it, so I'll try to exercise, I'll try to
Hmm.
talk to someone, I'll read, I'll do uplifting, positive things to jam my head out. It
Hmm.
almost feels like I'm in a cage, and these things just don't break free of that. Um, yeah, so there's a range, and depending on how debilitating it is, really depends on how much I'll fight it and try to chase some kind of chemical counterbalance. If it's something that I sense is worth fighting, something I can
Hmm.
get out of, I will try very hard. So I'll listen to like really upbeat music. I'll
Hmm.
exercise vigorously to
Hmm.
try to just get those chemicals, the positive chemicals, just running in my brain.
Hmm.
And I'll try to basically, it's almost like a inorganic way of summoning up some courage against it. And other days that doesn't work. And
Right.
for those days, reading, watching television, not talking to people, just kind
Yeah.
of hibernating.
Yeah. So a lot of what I get from well, myself and then like listeners of the show is like I seem to attract the folks who are really struggling. Um and we just get to the point where like we don't even have the energy to try, right, to do those things. And like our mindset is so stacked against it that it's like, well, why even bother, because that's not going to work. And it's not it doesn't come across as like a suggestion. It comes across as like, this is fact. Like your brain is telling you like, hey, nothing is going to help, why even bother. um
Mm.
and so that's kind of encouraging to hear, that you get to a point where you're still like, hey, I can go out and try these things. I can go out and run a mile, or lift some weights, or turn on my favorite comedy sitcom or whatever. Look up some YouTube videos, and it can kind of help you with that. And that's really cool. That's really
Mm.
promising. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think probably the most uplifting thing is that when I was at my worst, which was suicidal a few years ago,
Hmm.
it has only ever gotten better from there. And I don't like telling people that there are solutions in the sense that you can wake up one day and fix this or live with it in such a way that you're thriving. And I
Hmm.
definitely don't think it's curable. I think it's something that you live with. It's almost like a roommate, and you have this roommate, and every once in a while he's going to wreck your kitchen. He's going to make the place a mess, and it's going to be terrible. You're going to have a blowout, and you're just going to have to concede certain things
Hmm.
um, in that relationship. But there are other days where you can communicate with that roommate. You can talk things out, and you can find a way to live with them. And maybe even for a few days or weeks, it's like perfect cohesion. And so, to some people who have mental illnesses that are not so debilitating, I do think there's hope, because it's an art to live with yourself, and it's not something anyone's going to master within a few years or even a few months. It's going to be the rest of your whole life is learning to live with yourself,
Hmm.
whether you have bipolar or depression or you have anxiety. There's just this part of your head that you're going to have to wake up to every day, and it may present itself stronger or maybe more relaxed. But that is up to your judgment to decide just how severely you're going to work with it or ignore it. And
Hmm.
it's a long process. I think giving
Yeah.
ourselves room to fail and giving ourselves days where we don't do very well against it and are okay with that. It's important to feel safe, knowing that it's okay to not be completely on top of it.
Right. Right. Okay. So what's your kind of how has your personal life been affected by this? Like your folks or significant others or best friends or whatever. Are they all in on what's going on with you? Are they supportive? Is it more you kind of keep it close to the vest? What's that like?
Well, I have this horrible problem of wearing my heart on my sleeve. It's like my moods are very
Mm,
obvious to people, and I have no idea. I've noticed this for years, and it's one of the few things that I can't really work on very well. Like, people know
mhm,
when I'm angry, people know when I'm sad, or it's like very clear to people who even don't know me. So in that sense, people understand. I don't tell everyone I meet or even my friends that I have a mental illness. I don't necessarily illustrate it in those terms. But people are aware of my very temperamental moods and just how like full of emotion I am, I guess you could say, because I can be
okay.
extremely exuberant and ecstatic, and I can also be like very, very down and solemn. And I definitely have a wide range that other people don't seem to exhibit as often.
Right.
And I think that what really started to help is when I noticed just how hard it can be for people to be around somebody who is depressed or who is beaten down mentally. Like, it's very
Hmm.
difficult sometimes, especially the closer the relationship is. So, in that sense, one of the things that helped me take a little bit more uh, ownership and responsibility for it was this sense that I had a responsibility to make people who are close to me, like my partner,
Hmm.
have a responsibility for their happiness as well, in the sense that insofar as I am maybe bringing them down, or I am uh, let's see, difficult to be around, I
Hmm.
can do what I can do every single day, whether it's a small thing or a big thing, to ameliorate that as much as possible. And since humans are so social and community is so vital, I think it's really important um, for people like me to try to make a sacrifice to really get on top of themselves so that they can be inspiring and passionate and uplifting for other people, because there are other people having problems as well.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Yeah. It's interesting that um, there's different philosophies when it comes to mental illness as far as what my responsibility is to others, as far as making them feel comfortable around me versus them helping me feel comfortable around them, if that
Mm,
makes sense, right?
yeah, definitely it does.
That there's a big sense when you're in such a depressive state that you can't, like bathing yourself is not an option.
Hmm.
um I guess in those situations you're not really going to be in a social situation too much. Folks with live-in partners, spouses, things like that, it's it's more obvious. And
Mhm.
if folks in a situation like me with my wife is just fantastic and very supportive.
Mhm.
I feel very fortunate in that sense. Whereas others, it's just a matter of contention, like the stereotypical, like, geez, you never get off the couch, or
Right.
the sink was full of dishes when I left for work, and now I've come home and they're still the same.
Mhm.
So it's interesting that to hear your side of it, that like, hey, you're gonna, it's important to you that you try to make it so that you're more comfortable to be around as much as possible. Obviously, you can't just, wiggle your nose and suddenly you're Mr. Life of the Party
Right.
kind of thing. But okay.
I, yeah, I think it is very it's very nuanced conversation, because I don't think it's as simple as you take responsibility for who you are and you try to not fix it, but
Hmm.
maybe dress it up or work with it, or you just completely give up. I don't think it's like those extremes at all. And I think that we all have different ways of expressing our efforts to better ourselves, which I guess is what I'm
Hmm.
getting at, is just trying to better ourselves. And I think really what it comes down to for me is just very clear communication, and being able to give those people who are close to us in our lives that heads up. Like I am feeling this way right now, and I don't know how you're going to react to it or work with it, but what I can do right now is tell you this, tell you how I feel, and maybe we'll just wait it out. Maybe I'll try some things.
Right.
Um, yeah, there's definitely nuance there, for sure.
But it sounds like those around you are, then they see you as maybe a hyper emotional person. And it sounds like
Mm-hmm.
they might like be able to acknowledge that and say, okay, hey, Quinn needs some space today. Or,
Mm-hmm.
like they're not forcing you to be, my best friend's life of the party Quinn every day, or
Right.
anything like that. So that's good. I mean, that gives you that kind of space that you need,
Mm-hmm.
without having to, express the mental illness that you're struggling with.
Well,
Okay,
what
so
what takes? Oh, sorry.
no, go right ahead. Go right ahead.
Well, what takes a lot of space, like pressure off my chest, is outside of professional situations. I don't feel like I have a responsibility to act a certain way
Hmm.
around people necessarily when it comes to personal relationships. Outside of just being, you know, not abusive or anything like that. When it comes to
Sure.
personal relationships, I don't feel too much anxiety, or especially not with acquaintances or friends, being
Hmm.
sad or whatever around them. Like I'm totally okay with being the solemn person. I'm absolutely okay being the freak as well, who's yelling and way too excited about things.
Sure.
Like I,
Okay.
I think I am just completely comfortable like that. And I've practiced comfort. So, an extreme example is a few weeks ago, I put on before Halloween. I went to there was a big event in Portland where there's lots of vendors and food.
Hmm.
It was like an outside market, but it was at night. So I put on a costume and a jester's mask and I started juggling in front of people. And it was this sort of exercise for me to just be a freak, right? Like be this thing that wasn't asked to be there, be this thing that is a complete pariah.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you're entertaining and interesting, but you don't necessarily belong. Because that's kind of what it feels like to have mental illness, is it's you don't feel like you belong because you are supposed to be in this social setting where people are expected to act and speak a certain way.
Hmm.
So if you can, for me to openly own acting, speaking, and thinking differently than hundreds of people around me and be happy with that, that was so liberating. Like that night, I was so anxious to put on the costume and do that. And it seems so
Hmm.
ridiculous. But as soon as I was performing and interacting with people through that persona, as soon as I took the mask off, I felt like I could do anything. Like it did
Wow.
not. It was insanely empowering just to own your freakishness. Because at the end of the day, I do feel like the mental illness makes me kind of a freak. Like I don't know who I'm going to be when I wake up. My moods are always crazy, regardless of my diet, my exercise,
Sure.
and I just roll with them. So I have to really own that to live, or else uh, I'm going to suffer greatly if I don't.
Wow. So, I mean, that's amazing. I can't even imagine like being that free or that comfortable in my own skin to be able to do that, right? I'm always thinking, like, what's that person over there thinking of me? What's that person on the other
Mhm.
side of the street walking down the street? What do they think of me? Do they,
Yes.
like, it's not even like, oh, they don't see me, they don't care. It's like, oh, that person just saw me trip over that crack, or
Right.
that person is wondering why I'm wearing this shirt with these pants or whatever.
Mhm.
And I can't get past that. I can't get out of my own way. And to
Mhm.
hear you talk like you did is like, wow, I'm kind of jealous of that.
Well, I mean, I think it's funny because like the only thing I did that night was invite more judgments and more criticisms from people, you know.
Sure.
Like it it doesn't change it. Like it's not that you become like someone who's very likable and charismatic because all of a sudden you're doing this wild thing. It's just that you
Hmm.
find a way not to care as much, I guess. But I mean, it was so difficult. Like I had this big mental block before I started performing. I just felt I was shaking. My partner was there and she was kind of going to support me, and
Hmm.
I was shaking and just like coming up with all these arguments why we shouldn't do it. I was talking about how maybe security would kick us out for looking like we were busking or trying to get money, and just every possible excuse before the moment, even though I had to put on all this makeup and had this costume on. And then even while I was doing it, I was looking at people through the mask, wondering, "Oh, this guy looks like he's a normal jock. He hates this. He thinks I'm being like some kind of weird imposing person. Oh, this person taking a picture of me, she likes it. That's cool. Like it's just, and the voice didn't go away. It's just there. You're just dealing with it. I literally put on music to drown out all of my thoughts. Like I put on very, very loud music just to kind of be in that space. Kind of felt like
Hmm.
I was dreaming.
Wow, that's yeah, jealousy. That's all I can envious. And I guess I'm envious, not jealous, right?
Mhm.
Wow. Okay, so you're um, technically not diagnosed.
Mhm.
So I assume you just haven't gone to see a psychiatrist. Um, that you're kind of comfortable where you're at right now, living with what's going on. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
definitely.
So
I I
what
think.
would it
Oh, sorry.
take in the future for, like, I mean, to take that next step?
To get
Like,
diagnosed?
yeah, yeah, and maybe
Mm,
get. I mean, I assume you're obviously not taking any medication without a
yeah.
diagnosis, right?
No, I'm
Or
not.
even seek therapy or something like that. I mean, is there? Can you envision, like, do you have a threshold, like, in the back of your mind, like, hey, if things get to this point, then maybe I'm not making it on my own like I was
Mm,
before.
yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because I didn't expect this, but the answer to those two questions are the same situation. So I didn't. The reason why I didn't get diagnosed is because the reason why I didn't seek it out is because I was inches away from killing myself when I started to figure out I had a problem. I think any
Okay.
human being who is not suffering terrible living conditions and not in you know some horrible circumstance
Hmm.
who has fantasies and is close to killing themselves, I think it's
Hmm.
pretty evident that something's wrong.
Yeah.
As long as they're seriously considering it for themselves rather than some, I don't know, some strange notion for maybe publicity or to appear a certain way to a
Sure.
friend. I think it's
Sure.
if it's actually this idea of like I need to find some Circes to my thoughts or the voices in my head, then in my mind at least that was enough for me to kind of step out of that situation and really take a deep breath and be like, wow, that is not okay. That's not normal. To me, that looks like an illness. So the answer to that is if I found myself nearing those thoughts again or that
Hmm.
circumstance again, I would definitely seek out some help.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, that's good. And I hope it never comes to that, right?
I hope so too. Thank you.
But yeah, so I mean, we're always on the depressive end of it. We're always talking about safety plans and having,
Hmm.
knowing, if I get to this point, I do this. If I get to
Hmm.
X, I do Y. If I get to whatever, whatever. Okay. All right. So overall, it sounds like you're managing and you're doing pretty well with the hand that's been dealt you so far. Is that pretty fair?
I would say so. I think I have. just a remarkable advantage. I don't really believe in, this will sound maybe, I don't think it'll sound contentious, but it might be shocking to some viewers because I think it's still kind of a taboo thing. But I don't believe in free will, which helps me understand myself a little bit more.
Okay.
I believe that we're just a product of our genes and how our genes are being expressed in our environment. So
Mhm.
that's also helps me see mental illnesses as just a cold, for example. It's very similar to me. It's just an expression of somebody's biology and their biochemistry and their neurology.
Mhm.
So in that sense, I feel like if I'm dealing with it well, just on my own, then I was just lucky to have the mind I had and the circumstances I had to kind of stumble across all the techniques I have to deal with it. But I think there's a lot of people who really don't have those techniques or the intuition to help themselves in that way.
Mhm.
Almost like if you were born in a family that fed you only bread and butter and you were taught that that was healthy. Luckily, I have siblings and people in my life who really are invested in steering me in a good direction, and I
Mhm.
don't have any shame seeking them out for advice. So maybe they don't have advice or support in a very specific sense towards my mental illness, but they
Right.
often always want the best for me. And so I'm always open to seeking a better version of myself through their advice or whatever I find is helpful in the given day or week. And I
Yeah,
think there's
that's
just so many people who are just not that fortunate, and it was super heartbreaking. And I do think many people should seek help professionally.
yeah. Yeah, so having those people in your corner is huge, right? You can't really
Hmm.
put a value on it. But like you said, there are so many people who maybe don't have that, or they've
Right.
got significant others who don't understand
Hmm.
mental illness and don't have the education to know what's going on.
Right.
Um,
Or
and
perhaps
that's
even the severity of the illness
right,
requiring a medication that I simply would never make use of.
right. Okay. Um, so tell me about your podcast, because that was one of the things that
Oh,
was
yeah.
like made this easier. Was like, hey, you're a podcaster, I'm a podcaster. Let's just hook up with our super cool
Hmm.
microphones. Let's get recording. So
Yeah. We love to show off our microphones. So,
yeah.
well, Mania, I named Mania after that expression of bipolar because I thought it
Mhm.
was fitting since it's often conveyed that serial killers or people who are horrible, we quickly call them psychopaths or we quickly
Yeah.
like to plaster mental illness on them, and for good reason. Maybe they are. It's often something in the mind that causes people to do horrible things, and so the podcast is about villains. It's about people who have done horrible things or who are ghosts, perhaps. Basically, I guess my elevator pitch is that it's a true crime podcast from the perspective of a villain, but it's often Victorian crime. So it's between the years of 1100 to 1900. So, and I know that back then that's not Victorian times, but a lot of killers and a lot of bizarre incidents involving murders takes place in the Victorian era, at least the well documented ones.
Okay. Wow. So are these are stories that you come up with, or are they do you have a repository that you're getting?
Well, I take from a lot of different sources. I don't take anyone else's stories, but I'll just go into events that have happened. Like, for example, let's see. In one of my episodes, I looked into I think it was galvanism. Yeah. So when people were studying electricity and the resuscitation of humans and thought that electricity was the key to human life,
Mhm.
basically, I just research key characters during their specific context, the time that they were in, the actions they did, and I write a story from their perspective. So I research whatever that event may be. In this case, it's smuggling corpses out of graves and doing experiments on them.
That sounds really creative. That's probably a good outlet for you.
I think one of the best things that has been for me for this, dealing with my head, is focusing on something else that's not me. The more I
Yeah.
try to solve me, it seems like the worse it gets almost. So I
Yeah.
just try to solve something else.
Yeah, you can get kind of sucked into the spiral if you're me, 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 me,
Right.
and that's unfortunately that's one of the ways that kind of mental illness tricks us, because we do kind of get drawn into our own head
Mm-hmm.
and can't see that there's something else out there besides what's kind of this misery going on inside our
Yeah.
brains.
Oh my goodness.
So,
Yeah, you described that exactly.
okay, well, cool. I'm not going to keep you. We're at like a half hour right now.
Okay.
And do you have anything else that you want to, like, I guess, let me step back for a second. Cause
Yeah.
I like to
Please.
um, give my guests an opportunity to share something that
Mm-hmm.
they think will help listeners out there, people who are
Okay.
struggling. So if you've got like a nugget of wisdom that maybe you picked up somewhere, or, I try not to go rah rah into like everything is going to be okay and
Right.
here's solution X for you and it's going to make you better, because
Mm-hmm.
we're all different. We all have our own unique physiology and chemistry and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, if I put you on the spot, which I'm gonna,
Okay. Here we
and
go.
ask you like what kind of nugget you could leave the folks listening to the show with, what would you suggest?
I have I have adored keeping a journal and at night before I go
Mhm.
to sleep, writing down just a few things or one thing I really want to do the next day. And oftentimes it's because we find that we've not met our standards or expectations for a day.
Mhm.
So journaling at the end of the night to kind of reflect like, oh, okay, today I didn't like how I behaved like this, or today I saw myself do this and I was proud of this.
Mhm.
What can I do tomorrow to take that next step or take the first step? And so I'll write down like tomorrow I would like to exercise, read for 30 minutes, and do this. And if I can do
Okay.
these three things, I'll be really happy with myself. And if I don't, I'll just try again the next day. But really just having this mindset of, okay, tomorrow is that clean slate. Like we don't have to wait for next week or next month or next year. Every day is that clean slate. And
Right.
we can try just one little thing maybe that we could be happy with. Um, and yeah, it's that opportunity is right there.
Yeah, I like that. So, setting some small goals for yourself for tomorrow, but
Mm-hmm.
not ruminating on them if you don't achieve each of them. Giving
Mm-hmm.
yourself the leeway to have a bad day, or have, maybe just life came up and you didn't get a chance to read for half an hour. You're not gonna
Definitely.
bemoan the fact the next night necessarily. Make note of it and say, okay, tomorrow
Right.
I'll give it another whirl. I like that.
Yeah. Well, and also because I think a lot of the existential dread and anxiety that people feel for maybe feeling self-loathing or feeling like they're failures is because
Mhm.
a lot of us have really ambitious goals. Even people who are, of course, people who are depressed know an ambitious goal they might have or a dream, even if they haven't consciously summoned it yet. It's in there somewhere, and so I think when we say things like, I'm going to write this book, or I'm going to have a successful podcast, or I'm going to be on a TV show, like these are such huge, complicated goals that take so many little tiny steps that will take years. And it gives us a lot of anxiety to wake up every day thinking we haven't achieved them. But to wake up every day seeing something that's within reach, like a small fragment of that dream that we can achieve, that's very
Mhm.
empowering.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. I I should try. Well, I shouldn't should myself, but I should try to do that. I have a hard time with kind of recapping my day,
Mhm.
because generally I just want to forget everything that happens during the day.
Oh, oh
Um,
no.
yeah,
I'm so sorry.
um, but yeah, I kind of like that. I'm gonna see if I can borrow that a little bit. I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing that.
Well, absolutely. And I mean, if it means anything, talking to you, you seem perfectly capable and in ownership of yourself. I wouldn't discredit yourself too much at all.
Yeah, yeah, that's easy to say. Probably easier to do also, but I can't seem to get there. But
Mhm.
okay, so your podcast Mania,
Mhm.
we can find that pretty much anywhere: iTunes, Google Play Music,
Yes,
all sorts
the
of
full
things.
name that I write it under is Harlequin Grimm, and you'll find it on iTunes or Spotify. It's really everywhere.
Okay, cool, cool. I'm gonna
Mhm.
check it out, and I love listening to podcasts. I have way more than I have time to listen to, but yeah, I'm gonna check it out. That sounds really cool. I like what
Well,
you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a pleasure as well to talk to you. I really loved it.
Yeah, thank you so much. And maybe we can have you back on one time later on. We'll see what the feedback is like. And yeah, it's been great talking with you, man. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Hey, everybody. Real quick, I hope you enjoyed that conversation I had with Quin. Check out his podcast with the links on the show notes. Check out more of my show over at jamolki.info, JAMOALKI. Everybody, thanks for listening. Be safe and be well.